It's time for Dirt Daily. Today's Dirt Daily is brought to you by ARB. ARB is a company that you probably have heard of for their air lockers. They're from Australia originally, but now they have offices all over the world. And they also make a lot of other things. Bumpers, suspension, both of which I have on my Land Cruiser project. And actually I run ARB air lockers in a lot of things. My summer camp Jeep has an air locker. My NewbSock Jeep has 2 air lockers. My little flat fender GPW has 2 air lockers. I have air lockers in my Dodge tow rig so that I can lock up the axles if I need to, but also unlock them for daily street driving. But today, I'm not installing air lockers. I actually have the factory style lockers in my Jeep JL, but what I do want to install is an ARB air compressor. They supply air compressors for their air lockers, but they also have air compressors just for airing up and airing down. And most of the time when I have this Jeep and I go four-wheeling, I carry the ARB compressor that's like kind of universal. It's like in a little suitcase. But I've wanted to put onboard air specifically for this vehicle so that it just stays in it. And I'm kind of putting together a kit. So today we're going to put this big twin air compressors. There's 2 air compressors, one on either side here. And so that's going to be installed in the back of the Jeep in this area underneath this little cover. My Jeep has that as an option. Some Jeeps have like, I think a subwoofer in there. So you have to check on that to make sure. And then I'm also going to use this mounting bracket. This is from Rusty's, and it will sit down in there and you can bolt the air compressor right to it. So that's kind of convenient. Speaking of convenient, look at this thing. ARB sent me these things. It's like got their logo on it. The ARB croaky type deal. I don't really know why they sent it to me, but I mean, I feel super active now. Plus I can hang it down here and I don't lose my glasses. So I got that, which is kind of cool. So today's project, pretty simple project. We're just going to bolt this to this bracket, put it in there, and then there's the trick of doing the wiring. There's lots of different systems for wiring. The ARB comes with their own harness. I have that S-Pod on the dash of my Jeep, so that's probably what I'm going to wire it into. And then I have to figure out how to plumb it so that it's easy access so that I can air up tires after going four-wheeling. Why do you air up tires? Well, why do you air down tires? I guess the big question. Most of you already know this, but for those newbies that don't know, I like to air down the tires so that the tire kind of spreads out, gets a little bit wider, get a little bit bigger traction, or bigger footprint so that you get more traction. And with bead locks, I probably air down to maybe somewhere between 4 and 10. If you don't have bead locks, you might try around 12 PSI. It all kind of depends on how heavy your vehicle is, what type of four-wheeling you're using, what type of wheels you are using. There are wheels out there that don't have bead locks, but they have kind of cool, grippy texture on the inner beads, and those you can air down a lot farther than just your basic stock type wheel. So, but airing down is super important. It's one of the best ways to make your vehicle perform better off-road. Not only does it ride better through rough terrain, it helps you get more traction. But when you air down, you got to air back up when you hit the highway. Otherwise, your tires can overheat and you can have tire failures. So, having an onboard air compressor is a great way to allow you to air down tires and air back up. And plus, if you ever pop a bead off, it's nice to have air. Plus you can use an air compressor for other things like airing up inner tubes if you want to float down a river, and you got these cool things on the back of your glasses so you can float down the river. All right, let's get to work. In the back of my JL there is this cubby, and inside it just has like this kind of foam board cover, and inside this cubby I haul some tools. I have wrenches, this roll, which is kind of like all sorts of random tools, screwdrivers, picks, pry bars, but all of this stuff has to find a new place because I'm going to put the air compressor in here. But that's fine because I actually have a new toolkit that I want to show you guys. But for now, all of this stuff is going to get excavated out of here and we will mount the air compressor down inside there. So I cleaned out the back of the Jeep, the little cubby, and that's where the plate, the bracket that mounts the air compressor is going to sit down inside there. I'm going to have to remove these tie down sections and get to the hardware to bolt that down. And then the air compressor itself will sit right in here. Now that's going to leave a couple questions of how do you wire it and how do you plumb it. There's basically two little wire harnesses for the compressor. One is a heavy gauge wire that's going to run up to the battery and that'll have some inline fuses. The other is the control wire that's going to run up to the S-Pod and that will be wired in so that when I push the dash controller for the S-Pod, it'll turn on the air compressor. Then I need to decide where is the air going to go so that I can plug in the air hose and air up the tires. I could just have the air chuck mount right on top of the air compressor, but I kind of foresee that this will be covered up with stuff. There's probably camping gear, maybe a cooler, maybe a dog bed, tools, whatever. So it's really not going to be that easy to get to this, which is fine. I just have to route a hose some way so that I can get to an air chuck. I'm actually thinking about putting it down on the back bumper, maybe hidden or protected by the trailer hitch, so that this can be plumbed down to that. And then when you turn on the air compressor, you just plug in a hose at the back bumper and run that hose out to any tire that you want to air up. So the next step is kind of figuring out how is this going to mount, how does it mount in here. It looks like there's just two bolts that hold it in place. And then how do we want to route the pressure line and also all the wiring. I kind of want to run the big gauge wires up the passenger side, maybe even inside the Jeep, and then have them go through the firewall right by the battery. And then the control wires, just the two little wires, maybe run up the driver's side and get that to the S-Pod. They may even go down and run up along the frame rail because there's already some wires running up there for the shocks and for the electric locker. So I can just kind of route them with those. Then it's just the plumbing. And I kind of think that there's a way to just run it down through underneath this bracket and through the floor. There's a drain plug in this little cubby that is protected by a heat shield for the rear muffler, but I think it will be tucked up well enough and then I could just run it down to that rear bumper. Have a little issue. It's not an issue, it's just, it seems like something could be better than it is. So I bolted the ARB compressor to this Rusty's bracket. And this Rusty's bracket sits right down inside there. But the air compressor has like a lot of wasted space around it. There's space on the front, there's space on the side, there's space behind it. And I understand you want some space to keep it cool, but I also feel like it's not very efficient the way it is. Plus it seems like there's more space around the edge here. So there's kind of like this 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch gap between the bracket and the outside or the inside of this tub. And it just uses like the bolts that bolt the tub in to hold this plate down. So I bolted it onto this, but I'm kind of thinking I'm going to remove it. And if I unbolt the compressor from this bracket, like, also the bracket's kind of heavy. Now, the air compressor fits really nice, like up against one side of the tub. And this only has holes in it in one style. So I could re-drill this, but it still leaves kind of this dead space around the edge of it. And I feel like with the air compressor bolted down to this plastic thing, even though it's plastic, it's in there pretty good. Like I tried to pry it out and I think it's glued or riveted somehow. So my new plan is to mount the compressor here so that I have as much space on this side as possible. And there's a reason for that. So I recently got my hands on this. This is from Mopar. This is a Jeep Rubicon toolkit. This is a toolkit specifically designed for Wranglers. And it comes with a bunch of stuff. Here's actually the layout of everything. This is a 83-piece roll-up toolkit. Jeep Performance Parts number JP 0006 or JP 0002. And I get it. A lot of people are like, well, who cares? But here's the thing. There's so many Jeep fans that are fanatics, and when they realize that they can get a toolkit that is specifically set up with logoed tools like screwdrivers and stuff that have the Jeep logo on them, I think that's, I mean, people are going to geek out on this. I know a lot of you are just going to be like, I just buy whatever cheap tool I can get my hands on. But there's also people that are going to love a little tiny ratchet with a Jeep emblem on. And I know that because I've seen people buy stuff like on Marketplace. They'll find an old worn winch that has an original Jeep logo on it. So when I got my hands on this, I was like, that's kind of cool. And my plan, or my goal, is to be able to put all of these tools in this tool bag and put it in that little cubby next to the air compressor. So I realized I need to get this tool roll, open it up, put all these tools in it, and then hopefully set up that cubby so that this tool roll can fit in there with all of the air compressor in there as well, and all the wiring for the air compressor, and all the plumbing for the air compressor, and do it in such a way that the air compressor still has like a little bit of breathing room so that it's not packed up against it. Look at this Jeep ball peen hammer. Are these really good tools? I don't know. I mean, they probably fix just about everything, like a full Torx set, a full Allen wrench set, some needle nose pliers. What's in this box? We have a full bunch of sockets, and then extra stuff like electrical tape, zip ties, a little piece of cable. So they've actually thought about a bunch of repairs, plus specific tools that work with like full metric, couple Jeep logoed adjustable wrench, Jeep logoed vice grips, because vice grips and duct tape seem to fix just about everything. So my plan is I'm going to pack all this stuff in this tool bag, and then when I'm stuffing in the air compressor, I can kind of see if this is all going to be able to live together in that spot. I hope it will. If the toolkit sits there and the air compressor's on this end, even there's a little bit, it's a little bit tight on this end of the compressor, but there's actually some room in between it. And then there's room all the way around for the filters on the end, because these filters, the air inlet filters will be on this end. and then the wiring can all be routed out. I think that's going to work better. So now the trick is I need to drill the holes in that tub to mount the compressor at this end, and then gain access to the hardware from the bottom, which is a little bit tricky because my muffler is still there. I haven't removed the muffler on this. Some people remove that last resonator muffler. I like how quiet it is, so I am going to mark the holes and drill and mount it right here, and then the whole toolkit can fit there. And if there's other tools I want to put in, they can go on top of this or around it. So yes, I have a nerdy Jeep Fanatic tool bag, but I don't know, I think it's kind of cool. Plus it has all this stuff in it already. So mark some holes and drill right through the plastic, bolt it straight to that, and then we will figure out the plumbing and the wiring. But I think everything can go right along here. There is a fan, a cooling fan on the back, and as long as there's enough space between that cooling fan and this tool bag, I think we should be fine. I got the air compressor mounted in the little cubby in the back. The next step is plumbing it. I went to town and got a high pressure line hose buildup that has these kind of AN style fittings and 90-degree fittings on either end. And then there's a fitting that comes with the air compressor. It's basically pipe thread to a -4 AN. And then this is the fitting that will go. This is basically a bulkhead style fitting, and this is where you'll plug your air hose in. I'm gonna mount this underneath the bumper right next to the receiver hitch, basically right in front of like the little chain attachment points on the Jeep. I think it'll be protected there and easy access for airing up tires. And then this line will attach to the top of the air compressor, and there's actually a cubby in the bottom, or actually there's a drain hole in the bottom of the cubby, and it'll run through that drain hole. It'll be above the heat shield, and then I'll kind of route it safely and down to the receiver hitch where the quick connect will be. So I need to mount this next and then route some hose. The proper way to do these heavy duty lines is to put one end on and then route it, and then you'll basically orient the other end before you get it crimped on. I didn't really have time to run back and forth to get that done. So, well, I mean, I probably had time, but I didn't take the time to do it. So now it's gonna have to be flexible enough to fit however it ends up. I mounted the compressor. Here's the hose that runs down through that grommet. That's the drain cubby hole. And then I rotated this fitting a little bit so that it would clear underneath this cover. And if we come outside here and up underneath, you can see how the hose comes in between the bumper and that cross member and tucks in behind the back there. And then that's the fitting. And that is where, if you have your air hose, that will step right in there. And then you just push that in and the air hose disconnects. So it's pretty easy and clean. This is tucked up enough that I'm gonna have to destroy the exhaust and a bunch of other stuff to really hook on it. But I'm pretty happy with that. The pin just barely fits in front of it, but it fits. So the next step is wiring. The air compressor has two wiring harnesses. One is a large gauge wire that has two 40-amp fuses, and there's two power lines and a big ground and a little ground. And this is what powers the compressor. And then the other is kind of a long wire that has different plugs on it in case you're controlling the air compressor with the factory, not the factory, but with the ARB switches. This, I am going to cut off 95% of it and only use this little plug, because I got some 2-wire that's already pre-insulated, and I'm going to wire this in, and then this has a heavy sheath on it, and I'm gonna run this through that same grommet where the air hose is going, and then run it up along the frame rail to the S-Pod. This is actually the control wire. So there's a purple wire and a black wire, and the purple will be the positive, the black will be the ground, and that we will wire into this. And then I got about probably 15 feet, which is probably more than enough, and we can route this safely up along the frame. And there's other wires already under there. There are my rear lockers, and there's some other stuff that I can kind of route this with. So that should be an easy route. The heavy wires, that's going to be a little bit trickier. I'm not sure yet if I want to run that underneath and up along the frame rail on the passenger side to the battery, or run it inside underneath the carpet up along the inside of the passenger compartment and then through a grommet in the firewall to the battery. But we're going to start with the signal wire. All right, I'm getting back at it on the air compressor. I took a day off and I was just kind of brainstorming how I wanted to do this. I had run the two wires, the control wires, up to the S-Pod, and I ran those underneath the body along the frame rail and then in the frame rail all the way up to the engine compartment where the S-Pod controller is. And I was thinking about running the power wires, which are these larger gauge wires, inside the cab, but I think I'm going to do the same thing. I think I'm going to drill a hole through the side of this plastic tub and run the heavier gauge wire. It'll be all in a sheath the whole way up there, and then run those up to the battery. I did have to extend these, so they are extended so that they'll reach up to the battery, but it really wasn't that bad routing them, and I think if I do it this way, it'll keep it nice and clean. I won't have to get underneath the carpet and deal with whatever's under there. And I can drill a hole right in the side of this tub to run the wires out. It's a plastic tub, so I'm less concerned about chafing, though I'll probably put some sort of grommet in there. And even if there's a little bit of airflow in that hole around the wires and the grommet, it really won't be that bad because the air compressor would like as much cool air as possible when it's running. So I think that's going to be our next our next step is to raise the Jeep up. I put it on the lift also to make it easier to work on. I'm going to raise the Jeep up, figure out exactly where to drill the hole, drill that hole, and then run the wires along the frame rail up to the battery. There we go. So it's going to plug in here, route right along here, and go right through the tub right there. Chipping away at the wiring on the air compressor. The control wire, the signal wire, was actually pretty easy. I used this trailer wiring that's already has like an insulation around it, and I just wired it in, and then I was able to feed it up. It basically followed the air hose from the air compressor, and then it goes into a cross member that is right behind the bumper, and then followed that all the way up the frame rail on the driver's side. Then right before a body mount, there was actually a hole in the top of the frame, a factory hole, and I was able to feed that wire up out that hole and then up to the S-Pod controller. It was a little tricky, but it wasn't too bad. I actually taped a piece of wire, just like welding wire, to the end of this trailer wire, and I was able to kind of fish it through and get it all the way up there. Now, the power wire over here on the passenger side is definitely a bit more of a battle. I want to protect that wire because that's where all the voltage is running down to the air compressor. There are some fuses up at the battery, but I don't want to have an issue where I have a short. I wrap that all in something called power braid. It's a wire loom from Painless Wiring. I actually had a bunch of this left over. So I wrapped most of that and I was able to feed that. I drilled that little hole in the side of the little tub that holds the air compressor and then fed it into the frame rail and slowly worked it all the way up. Now, I'm just about at the far end and I'm running into a blockage in the frame. So I'm gonna actually end up backtracking a little bit and then feed it on the inside. Let's move ahead and I'll show you. This side comes out and you can see right here where there's a couple different wires and a hose. All of that is up above the exhaust, and it all feeds into the frame rail. This side was a little bit trickier. I was able to run it up. The frame, and then you can just see the wiring inside there. I have it running up the frame rail, and it's currently coming out this hole, and it needs to go straight up behind this splash guard to the battery. But I don't like it coming out that hole because the front tire is right there, and if it's under flex or the tire kicks something up, I don't want to have an issue. So I think I'm going to actually backtrack to about this spot right here, and there's a hole on the inside of the frame. It's kind of hard to get to because it's between the frame and the fuel tank, but I think I have enough extra loom here. It's all kind of laying out, and I have this extra long tail that if I get all of that and I feed it through this hole and get it to that inside hole, I think you can just see it inside there. If it pokes through that and then up to the battery, I'll have better option of getting it protected but up to the battery, and then I can zip tie it up out of the way on the inside. So we're going to backtrack a little bit and then refeed it through that hole in there. I dropped the inner fender liner and the wiring comes up through here. I zip tied it up out of the way. I got to trim some zip ties, and then it pops up right here. It's down in here, and I split it off, ran the ground over here, and the positive is buttoned in there. You can see right here in between the two are the two big 40 amp fuses. So everything is wired in. Over on the passenger side, I put the logo sticker on the S-Pod, and inside here you can see the two wires are running in. So we are just about ready to test this. I have the air hose hooked up, air compressors hooked up, all the wiring is plugged in. I think the next step is to turn on the accessory on the Jeep and push the button on the S-Pod, and I hope we'll have an air compressor running. Cross your fingers. Air compressor works. That's awesome. Couple things about putting in an ARB air compressor in the back of your Jeep. You're gonna have to extend the wires. The wiring harness that they come with is not really long. I think there are other mounting brackets that you can put them under the hood, but I kind of wanted it back here. Having the air compressor in the back here is going to work good for me. I know there are a lot of brackets that you can buy that can mount the air compressor under the hood. I just kind of wanted to use this space. I think it's going to work good because I have the air chuck right back here. Will it make a lot of heat under here? That is a concern. I might look into a different type of cover, maybe a cover that has a little bit more airspace. I think having this toolkit fitting in here nice is great. It is a little bit tight on the air compressor. So I'm kind of torn on, will it stay here or will I put other things here that have a little bit more space around the air compressor, and then maybe store the tools like in the footwell. I don't have a back seat, so I have plenty of room in here, but I kind of like the idea of having it all hidden underneath this. This cardboard thing is kind of getting broken on my Jeep because it's got a bunch of miles on it. I might also look into some sort of security box, or maybe even just build one, because it's really just a flat piece of plate that needs to kind of pivot up in the middle. So it wouldn't really be that hard of a fab project. And then in the back of my Jeep is like a dog bed and usually a cooler back here and all that sort of stuff. ARB has lots of different sizes compressors as well. And so if you don't need the twin, they have a single, and then they have a little tiny one. And it also depends on if you're running air lockers or if you want to do your own wiring like I did on this. So overall, I'm pretty stoked. I now have that air compressor installed. I can air up and air down. There are a lot of different onboard air systems out there, whether it's an engine-driven compressor or a tank that you refill with CO2. I've had really good luck with the ARB compressors. They make different sizes, big ones and small ones, and I've used them all on different vehicles, different projects. I'm stoked that I can finally have the twin air compressor in NewbSock, and I no longer have to carry that big suitcase portable compressor, but that'll probably go in my tow rig or something else so that I can use it on other projects around the shop. But if you are looking for an air compressor or anything from ARB and you can't find it at your local off-road shop, go check out the ARB website. They have a brand new website where you can buy everything, order it online, and they'll ship it directly to you. So that about wraps up this Dirt Daily. The little Jeep is one step closer to its next big adventure. We'll see you guys next time.